Colonel Schott, doesn't it appear that this man must be watching churches early in the morning for his intended victims, particularly elderly women who are attending services and upon leaving might be vulnerable to his kind of attack?
Yes, that is a definite possibility.
Colonel Schott, doesn't it appear that this man must be watching churches early in the morning for his intended victims, particularly elderly women who are attending services and upon leaving might be vulnerable to his kind of attack?
Yes, that is a definite possibility. The victim this morning attended communion at St. Peter's Cathedral. She left there around 7:30. Apparently on her way home, this fellow observed her, and it was apparently a crime of opportunity. The victim presented herself, and he just took advantage of it and struck.
For the last 4 years, since 1962, Miss Lula Carrick had lived here, apartment 7 in the Brittany Apartments on West 9th Street. She left here early this morning to go to 6:30 Mass at St. Peter and Chains Cathedral, which is only a few blocks away. It was her habit to go to Mass every morning, sometimes at noon, sometimes at 6:30. She returned after Mass to this building to come back to this apartment. She never reached here. To get to the elevator, Mrs. Carrick had to walk down this dimly lit hallway, which runs to the north side of the building, coming off the front door, which is at street level. She had to come back here to get to this elevator, open the door. This elevator, an automatic one, it's a small one. It's no more than 3 by 3 feet. Whether the killer assaulted Mrs. Carrick as she walked down the hall, or whether he waited to get here inside this small elevator, waited for her here, isn't really known. What is known is that the body of Miss Lula Carrick was found in this elevator at the 5th floor level, which would be 1 floor away from her own apartment.
The Cincinnati Strangler was the name given to an American serial killer responsible for the murder of 7 women in Cincinnati, Ohio, between December 1965 and December 9, 1966. During the investigation, a local resident, Posteal Laskey Jr., June 18, 1937 to May 29, 2007, was declared the main suspect in the killings and was arrested on December 9, 1966, for one of the murders for which he was subsequently convicted. Although he was never charged with the other murders, the media and police blamed him for the other deaths since, according to the official version of the investigators, the murders ceased after his arrest. Cincinnati Strangler. Posteal Laskey Jr., the man believed to be the Cincinnati Strangler, born Posteal Laskey Jr., June 18, 1937. Cincinnati, Ohio, U.S. died May 29, 2007, aged 69. Pickaway Correctional Institution, Scioto Township, Pickaway County, Ohio, U.S. Occupation. Former cab driver. Convictions. First-degree murder, criminal penalty, death, commuted to life imprisonment by Furman v. Georgia. Details. Victims. 7, 1 conviction. Span of crimes. 1965–1966. Country. United States. Ohio. Date apprehended. December 1966. Murders. The perpetrator chose as victims women between the ages of 31 and 81 living in Cincinnati's various housing complexes, which were inhabited by poor residents of the city. In 5 of the 7 murders, the victims were sexually assaulted. The first victim was 56-year-old Imogen Harrington, who was strangled to death on December 2, 1965. 4 months later, on April 4, 1966, the 58-year-old Lois Dant was found strangled, raped and beaten in her ground-floor apartment. She was talking to a friend on the phone and hung up when there was a knock on the door, which, according to the investigators, had been done by her killer. On June 10, the strangler attacked the 56-year-old Matilda Jeanette Messer in one of the city's parks and beat, raped, and strangled her. After killing her, the criminal tied Messer's dog to a tree in the immediate vicinity of the body. The next victim of the serial killer was the 31-year-old Barbara Bowman, who was attacked on August 14. She had been to a bar that day, and then called a taxi to drive her home. After the car arrived, Bowman got in. The driver was described as a young black man. Less than 2 blocks from her apartment, she was attacked by the cabbie, and stabbed in the throat 7 times. She died shortly after the police arrived, but witnesses managed to describe the criminal and even write down his license plate. However, her age and the fact that the culprit had used a knife caused Bowman to be initially temporarily dropped from the list of victims. During the investigation, it was established that the perpetrator was traveling in a taxi belonging to the Yellow Cab Company, number 186, which had been reported stolen to the police a few hours before Bowman's murder. At 31, she was the youngest of the killer's victims. On October 11, the newly dubbed Cincinnati Strangler killed the 51-year-old Alice Hockhausen. 9 days later, on October 20, the 61-year-old Rose Winstzel was found beaten and strangled in her apartment. On December 9, the criminal attacked the 81-year-old Lula Carrick in the elevator of her downtown apartment building, during which he beat and strangled her with one of her own stockings. Investigation. The series of murders caused a moral panic among the Cincinnati population. As a result, the city recorded a colossal increase in sales of weapons and door locks. The level of confidence among girls and women dropped sharply, and the Cincinnati police announced a special operation to capture the perpetrator. Several bars and nightclubs were closing earlier than normal. Halloween was moved to Sunday afternoons for 2 years. On December 9, 1966, after the murder of Carrick, 22-year-old Sandra Chappas contacted the police and claimed that a few hours before the Carrick killing, she had been followed by a suspicious black man to her car, who promptly attempted to rape her on the stairwell of her apartment, but she was thankfully saved by her neighbor. Chappas and a few other witnesses remembered the license plate number of the car that the offender was driving and passed it on to the police. On the same day, the car's owner, the 29-year-old Posteal Laskey Jr., a laborer, was arrested. Laskey was living with his mother and in his free time tried to build a career as a musician, playing guitar in a little-known group. Shortly before his arrest, he had left his house and rented an apartment in another part of the city, where he was living with a friend. After digging into his past, the police discovered that Laskey had been prosecuted for attacking a woman in 1965, and sentenced to 3 years probation in October 1965. It was also revealed that Laskey had worked as a taxi driver for the Yellow Cab Company from July to December 1962, when all cars used identical ignition keys, and that he drove number 186. The company management told the police that after his dismissal, Posteal pocketed the ignition key and a number of other items that he was supposed to hand over. On the night of August 13, 1966 and the following morning, after the numbered 186 cab had been stolen, somebody answered the dispatcher's calls and then picked up Barbara Bowman. After surveying visitors to the bar, witnesses told that they had seen Bowman leaving and entering into a taxi. After being presented with photos of the suspect, they identified Posteal Laskey as the driver and Barbara's likely murderer. After the arrest, 69-year-old Della Ernst contacted the police and proclaiming that Laskey had robbed her on October 4, 1966. A similar testimony was given by Virginia Hinners, who said that Posteal had robbed her on September 21 that same year. Aftermath. Based on the circumstantial evidence and testimony. In April 1967, Posteal Laskey Jr. was convicted of killing Barbara Bowman and was sentenced to death in the electric chair. The date of his execution was set for July 8, 1968, but by then, his lawyers had appealed the verdict by citing the fact that the presumption of his innocence was violated when Posteal was vilified by the prosecutor's office and the media as the infamous serial killer, which they had failed to prove in court. The intense publicity surrounding the case had prevented their client from receiving a fair trial, but the court rejected the appeal by stating that there was no racial or social prejudice in the decision. Nevertheless, the U.S. Supreme Court, in June 1972, commuted Laskey's sentence to life imprisonment with a chance of parole. For the rest of his life, Laskey was moved around various penitentiaries in the state. He applied for parole on several occasions but was denied each time. In February 2007, the 69-year-old was once again denied parole and banned from applying until 2017. However, he died on May 29, 2007, after he had spent more than 40 years behind bars.